My daughter called me on a Tuesday. That's the part that breaks the story open, so I'll start there. She was 11. She said, "Dad, the men from your work came to the school today." I hadn't worked in 9 weeks. I was between rotations, living in a furnished apartment in Virginia Beach, trying to teach myself to cook something that wasn't from a can. There was no man from my work. I didn't tell her that. I asked her what he looked like, and she said he was tall and had a nice suit and he knew my name and he told her I was doing important work and that she should be proud of me. I called her mother. I called the school. I called my program manager at Crestfield Global Solutions. Nobody could tell me anything useful. The school said no visitor had signed in. Her mother said Elena tended to exaggerate. My program manager said I should get some rest before my next rotation. 2 days later, Crestfield sent me an assignment brief for a job in Tbilisi. I should back up. I spent 11 years in the Army, 6 of those in 3rd Group, the rest in places I'm not going to name because the story I'm telling you isn't about that. When I got out in 2014, I did what a lot of guys did. I signed with a private security firm. First it was Aegis, then a smaller outfit called Trident Horizon, and by 2019 I'd landed at Crestfield. Crestfield was boutique. 40 or 50 operators at any given time, mostly former SOF, a few SAS guys, a South African named Peter who'd been everywhere. The contracts were unusual. We didn't do embassy security. We didn't babysit diplomats or ride shotgun on convoys. Crestfield's bread and butter was what they called close proximity asset management, which is a $15 way of saying we were hired to shadow specific individuals in specific locations for specific durations, and we were told almost nothing about why. That was fine. The pay was extraordinary. The rotation schedule was generous. 60 days on, 30 off, with a per diem that would make a GS-15 cry. I didn't need to know why a man in a linen suit was spending 11 days walking between 3 buildings in Almaty, Kazakhstan. I just needed to make sure nobody interfered with him while he did it. My first 5 assignments were like that. Unremarkable. I could give you dates and countries: Bahrain, 2019. Maputo, Mozambique, early 2020. Almaty, which I just mentioned. Bogota, late 2020. Djibouti, 2021. The principals varied. Some were talkative, some ignored us entirely. Some were clearly intelligence adjacent. Others didn't fit any profile I recognized. They weren't military. They weren't corporate. They moved through cities with a kind of focused calm that reminded me of surgeons, or people doing very precise interior work, like they were measuring rooms nobody else could see. We worked in foreman teams. My team for most of this period was me, a guy named Harlan McCready out of 1st SFODD, a former MARSOC operator named Davis Keane, and Peter Van Graan, the South African I mentioned. Peter was the oldest. Maybe 52. He'd been doing contract work since the late 90s, executive outcomes, then Sandline, then a decade of corporate maritime security before Crestfield picked him up. Peter didn't talk about his past much, but when he did, it had the specific weight of things that had actually happened to someone. I trusted him more than anyone I'd worked with since the Army. The Almaty job was the first one that felt wrong. The principal was a woman. Mid-40s, maybe. South Asian descent, but her passport, which we saw briefly during transit, was Belgian. She spoke French to us, English to the locals, and something else on her phone that none of us could identify. Not Kazakh. Not Russian. Peter said it might be a dialect of Dari, but he wasn't sure, and Peter spoke 4 languages fluently. She was staying at a residential block on the south side of the city, near the mountains. Not a hotel. A privately arranged apartment. Our job was standard close proximity, maintain a 1-block perimeter on foot during her outings, stage a vehicle within 90 seconds of her position at all times, and under no circumstances make direct contact unless we observed an imminent physical threat. For 7 of the 11 days, she walked the same route. Out the front door at 8:40 a.m. East on Tolby Street. South toward the Green Bazaar. She'd enter the bazaar, walk through the dried fruit and spice section, cross the open courtyard, and sit at a specific bench near the south exit. She'd sit there for exactly 90 minutes. She didn't eat. She didn't read. She didn't use her phone. She watched the crowd. On the 8th day, I was on the close rotation, meaning I was the team member positioned nearest to the principal, about 30 meters away, seated at a tea vendor's stall with a clear sight line to her bench. I'd been watching her for an hour and 12 minutes when I noticed she was counting. Her lips were moving. Barely. Just the faintest motion, like someone doing mental arithmetic that was slightly too complex to stay fully internal. Her eyes tracked individual people in the crowd, not scanning, not the way we do it, looking for threat indicators. She was selecting. Her gaze would land on someone, hold for 3 or 4 seconds, her lips would move once, and then she'd move on. I counted her counts. In the remaining 18 minutes I observed her, she counted 31 people. I brought this up at the debrief that evening in our staging apartment. Harlan shrugged. Davis said she might be a census researcher or an anthropologist. Peter didn't say anything for a while, and then he said, the one in Maputo did the same thing. I hadn't been on the Maputo job. That had been Peter's team under a different lead. I asked him what he meant. The principal in Maputo. Old man, Portuguese national. Every day he went to the Mercado Central. Sat in the same spot. Counted people. Peter paused. I watched him do it through the scope once, when I was on Overwatch. Exact same lip movement. Same rhythm. Like they were trained by the same person. None of us said anything for a moment. Did you report it? I asked. Reported it to Crestfield. Program manager said it wasn't a security concern. Said our job was proximity, not analysis. Peter took a sip of his tea. Told me to get some rest before my next rotation. That phrase landed differently the second time I heard it. The Almaty job ended without incident. The Belgian woman completed her 11 days. A Crestfield logistics coordinator collected her from the apartment on the morning of the 12th day. We flew out of Almaty International on a commercial flight to Istanbul and connected back to the States. I spent my 30 days off in Virginia Beach, went to Elena's school play, assembled a bookshelf, and didn't think about the woman on the bench. The Bogota assignment came next, and I need to tell you about that one in some detail. The principal was a man. Late 50s. Heavy set, balding, deep tan, and the kind of physical ease that comes from either extreme wealth or extreme fitness earlier in life, the body remembering comfort even as it declines. His passport said he was German. His Spanish was flawless. He was staying in a rented house in the Usaquén district, a wealthy neighborhood in the north of the city. Beautiful area. Leafy streets, boutique restaurants, weekend flea markets. The kind of place where security work feels almost like tourism if you let yourself relax, which you shouldn't. This job was 14 days. Same parameters, 1 block perimeter, vehicle staged within 90 seconds, no direct contact unless threat was imminent. For the first 6 days, the German followed a route. Not to a market this time, but to a park, Parque de Usaquin, a small green square with benches and old trees and a colonial church on its west side. He'd arrive at 9:15 a.m. He'd sit on a bench near the church. He'd watch the crowd. He counted. I saw it on day 3. Same movement. Same rhythm. The lips barely parting, the eyes selecting specific individuals from the flow of pedestrians, holding for 3 to 4 seconds, moving on. I told the team that night. Davis said, "All right, so they count people. That's their job. Intelligence collection or behavioral research or something. Crestfield contracts with all kinds of agencies." 2 different principles, I said. 2 different countries. Same exact behavior. Down to the timing. So they went to the same school, Davis said. Langley runs 1,000 programs we'll never hear about. Harlan was less dismissive. He'd started keeping notes, not official logs, just a pocket notebook. He showed me his sketch of the Germans' route overlaid on a map of the neighborhood. He's covering the same ground pattern as the Almaty woman, Harlan said. If you scale for the different street grids. Same radial distance from his start point. Same clockwise drift. Peter looked at the sketch for a long time. The one in Maputo did the same pattern, he said. I thought it was just his routine. Old man, set in his ways. But this is the third one. Day 7 in Bogota was when things changed. The German left his residence at 9:15 a.m. as usual. He walked to the park. He sat on his bench. At 9:22, he began counting. At 10:04, 42 minutes in, he stopped. He turned his head and looked directly at me. I was 80 meters away, seated at an outdoor cafe table behind a stone planter, wearing local clothes, blending perfectly with the mid-morning crowd of professionals and tourists. There was absolutely no reason for him to identify me at that distance, in that context, on that day, when he hadn't acknowledged any of us for an entire week. He didn't wave. He didn't gesture. He just looked at me with an expression I've been trying to describe accurately for 3 years and have never managed. The closest I can get is this: he looked at me the way you'd look at a number you'd been expecting to see appear in a long sequence of numbers. Recognition, but not of me as a person. Recognition of me as a value. Then his lips moved once, and he looked away and went back to the crowd. I reported it immediately over comms. Harlan, who was on vehicle standby, said, "Did he count you?" That question stayed with me for a long time. The German completed his 14 days. We extracted without incident. I went home to Virginia Beach. I assembled nothing. I didn't sleep well. The next 3 assignments, Djibouti, a short 2-week stint in Thessaloniki, Greece, and a longer deployment in Erbil, Iraq, each had different principles but the same essential pattern. They went to populated public spaces. They sat. They watched. They counted. The lip movement, the selection pace, the 3 to 4 second hold on each individual, it was identical every time. The routes varied by city but followed the same underlying geometric pattern when you scaled for the local street grid, which Harlan had started mapping obsessively in his notebook. The Erbil principle was the one that made Davis start paying attention. She was young. Late 20s, maybe. She looked Kurdish but carried a Brazilian passport, which made no sense. She was assigned to the Ankawa district, the Christian quarter, full of cafes and shops and a kind of desperate normalcy that clings to places that have been too close to war for too long. She went to a busy intersection every morning at 7:45 and counted from inside a parked car that Crestfield had arranged for her. On day 9, Davis was on close rotation. He was positioned in a barber shop across the street, getting an unnecessary haircut to maintain cover. He watched her through the mirror. At 8:31 a.m., she stopped counting. She took out a phone and made a call. The call lasted 11 seconds. Then she resumed counting. That evening, Davis told us what he'd overheard through the open window of the barber shop, which was maybe 25 meters from her vehicle. She had said one sentence, in English, clearly, 39 is here but it isn't ripe yet. Peter set down his fork. Say that again, he said. 39 is here but it isn't ripe yet, Davis repeated. Peter stood up from the table, walked to the window of our staging apartment, and looked out at the Erbil skyline for almost a full minute. When he came back, his face had the expression I'd only seen on him once before, in Djibouti, when a vehicle had deviated from its expected route and he'd had 2 seconds to decide if it was a threat. The expression of a man running calculations he doesn't have enough information to complete. In Maputo, Peter said carefully, I was on close rotation on the last day. The old man, the Portuguese. He was on his bench at the Mercado Central, counting. And then he stopped. He took out a phone. I was close enough to hear him. He said, in English, and this man barely spoke English, I'd heard him struggle with it at the airport, he said, 17 is here but it isn't ready yet. Silence. Different number, I said. Same structure, said Peter. Same phrasing. Like a status report. Status report to who? Harlan asked. Nobody answered that. We finished the Erbil rotation. On the flight home, Harlan showed me his notebook. He'd compiled everything, the routes, the counting cadences, the mapped geometric patterns. He'd added a new section, a log of every observable interaction the principals had made, cross-referenced by time and location. At the bottom of the last page, he'd written a question in block letters. What happens to the ones they count? I stared at that question for most of the Atlantic crossing. The Tbilisi assignment, the one that came 2 days after Elena told me about the men at her school, was different from the start. The brief was longer than usual. 3 pages instead of 1. The principal was listed as Dr. Renaud Asselin, French national, age 61. Occupation, unlisted. Duration, 21 days, the longest rotation Crestfield had ever sent us on. And there was a new clause in the operational parameters, one I'd never seen before. Team is authorized to operate within a 15-meter perimeter of the principal during designated interaction windows. 15 meters. That was close enough to hear a conversation. Close enough to see what was on a screen. In 4 years of Crestfield work, we'd never been authorized within 30 meters. They want us to see something, Peter said when I showed him the brief. Or hear something, said Harlan. Davis said nothing. Davis had been quiet since Erbil. We arrived in Tbilisi on March 3, 2023. The city was cold and clear, the sky that particular shade of pale blue you only get in the Caucasus in early spring. I'd never worked Georgia before, but I liked it immediately. The old town climbing up the hills, the sulfur baths steaming in the gorge, the slightly chaotic energy of a place that's been conquered 15 times and decided to just keep living anyway. Dr. Asselin was already at his residence when we arrived, a rented apartment in a renovated building on Lesalid Street, in the heart of the old town. We established our staging point 2 blocks east, in a commercial space above a wine shop. First impressions of the principal: tall, thin, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He moved with the focused calm I'd come to associate with all of them. He greeted us through the logistics coordinator, a brief, formal nod, and retreated into his apartment. For the first 4 days, the pattern held. Asselin walked to Reich Park every morning at 8:30. He sat on a bench overlooking the river. He watched the crowd. He counted. His lips moved with the same cadence. His eyes selected with the same 3 to 4 second hold. Harlan mapped his route and confirmed it matched the scaled geometric pattern. On day 5, the authorized interaction window opened. Crestfield sent a coded message to my team phone at 7:14 a.m., window active. 15 meters. Maintain passive posture. Observe and log. I took the close rotation myself. I positioned at a bench 17 meters from Asselin's usual spot in the park, with a newspaper and a coffee from the vendor on Reich's East Path. At 8:30, he arrived. At 8:33, he began counting. At 9:01, he spoke. Not on a phone. Not to anyone visible. He simply began speaking aloud, in English, in a calm and measured voice pitched just loud enough for me to hear across the morning air. As if he were dictating. Node 417. Tbilisi Central. Morning census, day 5. Density is adequate. Maturation index on 14 observed subjects is between 0.6 and 0.8. 3 subjects are above 0.9. Tagging for follow-up. No subjects at threshold. He paused. His lips moved silently for a moment, the counting, and then he spoke again. Revised. 1 subject at threshold. Young male, bench east, newspaper. 0.97. He was talking about me. My training kept me still. My heart rate, which I could feel in my temples, did not. I kept my eyes on the newspaper. I controlled my breathing. Asselin continued counting the crowd as if he hadn't said anything unusual. At 9:47, he stood up and walked home. Standard route. I maintained my position for 5 additional minutes, then broke and returned to staging. I told the team everything. Played back the audio from my concealed recorder. We listened to it 3 times. What's a maturation index? Davis asked. It's an agricultural term, Peter said. You measure how close a fruit is to being ripe enough to pick. The room was quiet. He's not counting people, Peter said. He's assessing them. They all are. Every principal, every city. They're looking at people the way a farmer looks at a field. Looking for what, though? Harlan said. What's the harvest? He said I was at 0.97, I said. At threshold, Davis said. What happens at threshold? I asked. Nobody could answer that. But Peter looked at me the way you look at someone who's just told you they found a lump, and I understood that whatever 0.97 meant, he was afraid for me in a specific and practical way. That night, I called Elena. She was fine. She told me about a science project involving beans and paper towels. She asked when I was coming home. I told her 3 weeks. She said that was too long. I agreed. Her mother took the phone and told me Elena had mentioned the men from my work again. He'd apparently been back, standing outside the school at pickup time, not approaching anyone, just standing and watching. I called Crestfield. I told the program manager that someone was surveilling my daughter's school and I wanted it investigated immediately. He said he'd look into it. He told me to get some rest before the operational tempo picked up. I set the phone down and sat on the edge of my bed in the staging apartment and felt something I hadn't felt since my first deployment in 2006, the sensation that the ground rules of the situation I was in had changed completely, and everyone else had known before me. Day 8. Asselin went to the park. Counted. During the interaction window, he dictated again. Node 417. Morning census, Day 8. Subject from Day 5 has progressed. 0.98. Approaching threshold. Recommend monitoring protocol shift to active. When I played the recording for the team, Davis stood up and said he wanted off the assignment. You can't, I said. Crestfield doesn't allow mid-rotation withdrawal without cause. This is cause, Davis said. He's doing something to you. Or measuring something being done to you. And we're being paid to stand here and let it happen. We don't know what threshold means, Harlan said. We know it means something changes, Davis said. And we know it's about Marcus specifically. And we know someone is watching his kid. That was the first time any of us said it plainly. The things we'd been treating as separate data points were one thing. Peter, who had been sitting in the corner cleaning his sidearm with a focus that I recognized as displacement activity, said, I want to tell you about an operator named Youssef. We all looked at him. Youssef Ben Ali. Moroccan French. Former Legion Étrangère. He was on my Maputo team. Good operator. Steady. On the 9th day of the Maputo job, the old man, the Portuguese principal, stopped counting and looked directly at Youssef. Same thing that happened to you in Bogota, Marcus. The look. Like he was recognizing a number. What happened to Youssef? I asked. He finished the rotation. Went home. 2 weeks later, Crestfield reassigned him. Special solo contract, they said. High value, extended duration. He was supposed to go to a city in Uzbekistan, Nukuz, I think. He sent me a message before he left saying it felt wrong but the money was too good. That was the last time I heard from him. When was this? Harlan asked. 2020, 4 years ago. Peter set down the gun. I asked Crestfield about him. They said he'd left the company. I asked his wife, he had a wife in Marseille. She said he'd come home from Uzbekistan different. Wouldn't talk. Wouldn't eat properly. Spent most of his time sitting in their garden, watching the street. Peter paused. She said he counted people. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I felt the specific cold of a puzzle piece locking into place in a picture you don't want to see. He became one of them, I said. I think so, Peter said. I think that's what threshold means. You reach it, and you stop being the person who's watched, and you start being the one who watches. Then what the hell is Crestfield? Davis asked. If they know this is happening, if they're hiring operators specifically to be in proximity to these people, are they feeding us to them? Some of us, Peter said. Not all. Most operators do their rotations and nothing happens. They never get counted. The principals never look at them. But some of us, he looked at me. Some of us register. Day 9. I didn't go to the park. I stayed in the staging apartment and told the team I needed to think. Harlan took close rotation. He reported that Asselin sat on his bench, counted for 30 minutes, and then stopped and said, audibly, Subject 417 Alpha is absent. Maturation continues independent of proximity. This is noted. Maturation continues independent of proximity. Whatever was happening to me didn't require me to be near him. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't a signal. It wasn't anything he was doing to me in the park. He was just measuring something that was already underway. I spent that day going back through everything. Harlan's notebook. My own records. The dates and cities. I laid it out on the floor of the staging apartment like a case board. Here is what I assembled. Every Crestfield principal was doing the same thing, sitting in populated public spaces, observing crowds, and assessing individuals against some kind of maturation scale. The scale went from 0 to 1. Most people they observed were somewhere in the middle. A few were high. Occasionally, one would reach threshold, which appeared to be at or near 1.0. The principals themselves were former threshold cases. People who had been assessed, had matured, and had been converted wasn't the right word, but it was the closest I had. They'd been turned from subjects into assessors. From crop into farmer. Crestfield knew. Crestfield had always known. The company existed to provide two things: cover for the assessors, and a supply of observers who spent extended time in close proximity to them. The security contract was real enough. The principals did need protection from random violence, the way anyone does in a war zone or unstable city. But the deeper function was exposure. We were there to be seen. To be measured. To be screened. Most of us were duds. Background noise. Not ripe. But some of us, for reasons I couldn't fathom, matured. I thought about Youssef Ben Ali sitting in his garden in Marseille, watching the street, his lips moving. I thought about the men outside Elena's school. I thought about the phrase .98 and wondered how much distance there was between that and 1. Day 11. I made a decision. I gathered the team at 6 a.m. I told them I was going to break protocol. I was going to approach the principal directly. I was going to ask Asselin what he was, what the count was for, and what happened at threshold. Peter and Harlan agreed to back me. Davis said he thought it was a terrible idea, and then he picked up his jacket and said he'd hold the perimeter. We went to the park at 8:30. Asselin arrived at his usual time. He sat on his bench. He began counting. I walked straight toward him and sat down on the far end of the same bench, 4 feet away. He didn't look at me. His lips kept moving. He counted 9 more people from the passing crowd. I watched his eyes track each one, and then he stopped and said, "You're early." "Early for what?" I said. "You aren't supposed to ask until you reach 1. Most people don't. The curiosity accelerates it, but the protocol is to wait. Your company was informed of this. Crestfield told you we'd approach you. Crestfield told me you specifically would approach me before day 14. They've been monitoring your biometrics. Your resting heart rate has been declining since Erbil. Your sleep architecture changed. REM cycles shortened, slow wave phases extended. These are the indicators." He turned and looked at me, and his eyes were calm and intelligent and completely devoid of what I can only describe as personal investment. He wasn't talking to me. He was informing a process. You're at .99. The approach itself may be the final increment. The final increment toward what? Toward being able to see what I see. He gestured at the crowd. I'm not counting people, Mr. Cole. I'm counting the ones that aren't. And as your index approaches 1, you'll begin to distinguish them as well. I looked at the crowd. Georgians walking to work. Tourists. A man selling churchkella from a wooden cart. 2 teenagers on a bench sharing earbuds. An old woman with a shopping bag. I don't see anything, I said. You will. He returned to watching. It typically begins within 72 hours of reaching 1. You'll notice that certain individuals in any crowd don't cast quite the right shadow. Or their reflections in shop windows are delayed by a fraction of a second. Or the people around them adjust their paths, unconsciously, to maintain a specific distance, the way iron filings arrange around a magnet they can't see. What are they? That's not a question I can answer in language you currently have. It would be like describing color to someone who's been blind since birth. In 3 days, you won't need me to explain. You'll look at any crowd and you'll see the ones that are in it but not of it, and you'll begin counting them because that is the only rational response to seeing them. Because someone needs to know how many there are. And if I don't want to. He looked at me again, and for the first time, there was something behind his eyes that might have been sympathy. Distant, clinical sympathy, the kind a doctor has for a patient who's just been told something irreversible. Then I recommend you stop being around people, he said. Go somewhere empty. Very empty. Because once you begin to see them, you will not be able to stop. And the compulsion to count, to track, to assess, is not something I've seen anyone resist. Yusef tried. He lasted 5 weeks in his garden before his wife called his handler and asked them to bring him in. Bring him in where? The next assignment, Asselin said. There is always a next assignment. I stood up from the bench. My team was arrayed around the park at their positions. Peter by the east path. Harlan in the vehicle. Davis at the perimeter, watching me through binoculars. I could see all 3 of them, solid and real and human. I could see the crowd. I could see the church and the river and the pale Caucasus sky. I did not see anything wrong with any of it, and I held on to that fact like a rope. I walked back to the staging apartment. I packed my bag. I called Crestfield and told them I was terminating my contract, effective immediately, in violation of rotation protocol, and they could keep whatever penalty they wanted for my escrow. The program manager started to say something and I hung up. Then I called Peter and told him what Asselin had said. All of it. The maturation index. The shadow inconsistencies. The delayed reflections. Yusef. The compulsion. Peter was quiet for a long time. I'm at point 82, he said. What? The Maputo principle. On the last day, when he made that phone call, the one I overheard. He didn't just say, 17 is here but it isn't ready yet. After the call, he looked at me and said a number. I didn't include it in my report because I didn't understand it. He said, 0.82. Slow maturation. Possibly non-viable. And then he went back to counting. Peter. I've been on more rotations than you. I've been in proximity to more of them. If what Asselin said is true, that exposure advances the index, then I should be farther along than you. But I'm not. His voice was steady, the way it always was. Some people metabolize it faster. That's probably what they're screening for. That's why most operators are fine. Their index never moves. But you, whatever this is, you're absorbing it quickly. I'm leaving, I said. Tonight. I'm going home. I'm getting Elena and I'm going somewhere there are no crowds. Marcus. Peter's voice dropped. The men outside Elena's school. He wasn't from Crestfield. He was counting. I caught a flight out of Tbilisi that night. Istanbul connection to Dulles. I was in Virginia Beach by 10 a.m. the next day. I drove straight to Elena's school and pulled her out of class over her mother's objections, which escalated into an argument in the school parking lot that I don't want to recount because it has nothing to do with what I need to tell you, and everything to do with how much I've lost since then. I took Elena to my mother's house in rural Montana. 1,800 people in the nearest town. My mother's property was 6 miles outside of it. I told Elena we were taking a long vacation. I told my mother I was between jobs. I sat on the porch of the house I grew up in and looked at the empty road and the yellow grass and the mountains and the absolute absence of crowds, and I waited. Day 1 after the conversation with Asselin. I felt nothing unusual. Day 2. Nothing. Day 3. I drove into town to buy groceries. It was a Tuesday. The main street of Hardin, Montana, had maybe 40 people on it. I parked outside the general store and walked in. The woman at the register smiled at me. A man in a feed cap was examining a rack of batteries. A teenager was in the snack aisle, looking at her phone. I got milk, bread, eggs, cereal for Elena. I was walking back to the truck when I noticed the man standing outside the hardware store across the street. There was nothing unusual about him. Jeans, work jacket, baseball cap. He was just standing there, looking at his phone, maybe waiting for someone. But his shadow was wrong. The sun was behind me, coming from the east, mid-morning. My shadow stretched west across the sidewalk. The shadows of the parked truck stretched west. The shadow of the woman walking her dog stretched west. The man's shadow stretched west too, but it was a half-second late. I watched it adjust as a cloud moved. Every other shadow shifted smoothly with the changing light. His lagged. Like a video feed with a barely perceptible delay. I got in the truck. I drove home. I didn't go back into town for 4 days. It didn't matter. On day 7, I was sitting on my mother's porch watching Elena play in the yard, and a FedEx driver came up the road to deliver a package. He got out, handed the box to my mother, tipped his hat, and drove away. And as his truck pulled out, I saw his reflection in the window of my mother's house, just for a moment, in the glass, and the reflection was still standing in the driveway after the truck had already pulled onto the road. I closed my eyes. I counted to 10. I opened them. The reflection was gone. The driveway was empty. Elena was laughing at something in the grass. I went inside and called Peter. He picked up on the second ring. It started, I said. I know, he said. Harlan called me yesterday. He's seeing it too. Bogota got him. His index must have been higher than we thought. Where's Davis? Davis resigned from Crestfield the day after you did. He's fine. He's in Tampa. He says he doesn't see anything. His index was probably low. Peter, what do I do? You do what Asselin said. You stay away from crowds. You keep your exposure low. The more of them you see, the more the compulsion builds. Yusef went wrong because he sat in his garden watching a busy street. If you're in a place where there's nobody to count, the pressure stays manageable. I can't live in isolation forever. I have a daughter. I know. A pause. There's something else. Crestfield called me. They offered me a new contract. Different from before. They want me to manage a team. Not security, coordination. Managing the assessors. Providing support for the ones who've turned over. They want to promote you into the system. They want to promote everyone who reaches threshold. That's the pipeline, Marcus. Operator to assessor. The company isn't a front, it is the system. The entire infrastructure. Hiring, deployment, rotation, exposure, maturation, conversion. It's all one process. And if you say no, then I stay at 0.82 and live my life, and maybe the index degrades over time without exposure. Asselin implied it might. Slowly. Another pause. But Marcus, you're at 0.99. You may already be at 1. And I don't know if your index can degrade. I don't know if there's a way back from where you are. I hung up. I sat on my mother's porch. The sun was going down over the mountains, painting the sky in bands of orange and violet. Elena came outside and sat next to me and leaned against my arm and said, "Dad, how come the mountains have two shadows?" I looked. The mountains had one shadow each, stretching east in the fading light, same as always. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The purple one and the other one. The one that's underneath." I looked again. I looked very carefully. And for just a moment I am not willing to extend by focusing on it, I thought I saw what she meant. A second shadow beneath the first. Fainter. Moving at a slightly different angle, as if cast by a sun that wasn't quite in the same position as ours. "I only see one shadow," I told her. "Let's go inside." That was 11 months ago. I am writing this from my mother's house. I have not been back to Hardin in 3 weeks. My mother does the shopping. Elena is being homeschooled. I spend most of my time in the house or on the porch, looking at the empty land, where there are no people to count and very few reflections to check. Peter calls once a week. His index hasn't moved. He declined Crestfield's offer. Harlan accepted it. Harlan is in Dakar now, sitting on a bench in a busy market, watching the crowd, his lips moving. Davis sent me a Christmas card from Tampa. He seems genuinely fine. I am glad for him in a way that is difficult to articulate. I have learned to manage the pressure. The compulsion to go where people are, to watch them, to count, it's there. It is always there. It's like a thirst. Not a dramatic, movie of the week kind of thirst. Just a persistent, low-grade awareness that there is something I could be doing that I am choosing not to do, and the part of me that wants to do it does not feel like a foreign invader. It feels like a skill I've acquired. Like learning to read, and then being asked to sit in a room full of books and not open any of them. Elena worries me. The comment about the mountain shadows. She hasn't said anything like it since, and I watch her carefully, not the way I was trained to watch people, but the way a father watches a child. She seems normal. She seems happy. She likes Montana. She misses her friends. I do not know if the maturation index is hereditary. I do not know if proximity to me advances it in her the way proximity to the assessors advanced it in me. I do not know, when she's old enough to go back into the world, to cities, to crowds, to places where whatever there moves among us in numbers I am now equipped to see, whether she will see them too. What I know is this. I made a choice. In a park in Tbilisi, a man who used to be a person and had become something more like an instrument told me what I was becoming, and I stood up and walked away. I broke my contract. I left the field. I came here, to the emptiest place I know, and I am holding on. Harlan didn't hold on. Youssef didn't hold on. Asselin, the Belgian woman, the German, the old man in Maputo, none of them held on. They reached threshold and they sat down and they started counting and they never stopped. I have not counted anyone. I have not let my lips move. When the compulsion rises, I go inside and close the curtains and sit in a dark room until it passes, the way you'd ride out a fever. But I need to be honest with you about one thing, because if I'm not, then nothing I've told you is worth anything. Last week, my mother came home from the store. She was unpacking groceries in the kitchen. I was sitting in the living room. She passed in front of the window, backlit by the afternoon sun, and her shadow fell across the kitchen floor. It was a half-second late. I looked away. I counted to 10. When I looked back, the shadow was normal. It was probably nothing. A trick of the light. My own damaged perception, seeing patterns where there are none because I've been trained, or conditioned, or matured, to see them. But here is the thing I can't stop thinking about. I didn't feel horror when I saw it. I felt relief. The way you feel when you spot someone you know in a crowd of strangers. A tiny, involuntary pulse of recognition that came and went before I could stop it. And I am sitting here in this house in Montana, in this beautiful empty place with my daughter sleeping down the hall, and I am not counting, and I am not watching, and I am choosing every single day to not become what they made me to see. But some mornings I wake up and my lips are moving. And I don't know what number I'm on.